Triumph Motorcycles, my thoughts on the brand. Okay, first of all, for a lot of motorcycle enthusiasts, if you mention Triumph, they can really only remember three different motorcycles. The first one that almost always comes up is the Bonneville, and that is the true retro-themed motorcycle that they are absolutely famous for. And Triumph is arguably the absolute best at putting together a motorcycle that can harken back to a riding experience from 40 or 50 years ago, all the while giving you all of the conveniences of being modern. Fuel injection, riding modes, and a lot more power than you had back in the day. It's an amazing motorcycle. I happen to own one, and it's one of my favorite rides. The next motorcycle that a motorcycle enthusiast might take a look at, especially if they're a sport bike enthusiast, would be the Daytona. Whether you're old school and you think of the 955 triples, or you're thinking about that 675 triple, those are motorcycles that guys remember as being the top of the food chain when it came to middleweight sport bikes. And they wouldn't be wrong. I can recall living in Northern California, and when the 675 would show up in the mountains, those bikes were hard to keep up with, and the riders that were riding them were enamored with their characteristics. And then the third bike that you would come up with, well, this is where things get a little bit weird. Some folks will, for the third bike, mention the Tiger family of bikes, that do everything sport utility type motorcycle that Triumph does a very good job with. They might bring up the Street Triple, which today is just a derived version of the old Daytona, just doesn't have a full fairing. It's confusing to a lot of folks. There are some people that would immediately, for their third choice, come up with the Rocket 3, a motorcycle that really does look like it came out of a comic book with its huge engine and crazy proportions. But that's kind of the weird thing about Triumph. You've got a couple of pretty standard answers, and then from there, the thoughts just kind of go scattered. And for a lot of people, they don't really ever consider going into a Triumph dealership because they think of the brand as being a bit stodgy. Remember that the Bonneville is just a standard motorcycle. And for many people, it's just a grandpa bike, even though it does perform pretty well, all things considered. The big issue here, though, is that Triumph really doesn't have the Daytona anymore. I mean, yes, I understand that they've released the 660, but the 660 Daytona is basically just a warmed over Trident. And for many people, this motorcycle does not have the chops to carry the Daytona name. Triumph has also been a bit confusing for guys. I had mentioned the Street Triple, a motorcycle that is literally the old 675 Daytona frame and swing arm, just with no fairing. And with the popularity of naked sport bikes waning at an alarming rate, you would think that Triumph would take a look at the winds of change, also understanding that they did just release the 660 Daytona, and maybe offer up a fully faired version of the Street Triple. I mean, you got to remember that it is Triumph that is supplying the engines for Moto2 racing, and they have a fully faired version of the 765 that is raced in that series. It doesn't seem like it would be too hard to put a full fairing on a frame and chassis and a swing arm and everything else that they're already doing that for, and call that the Daytona. Give it a tune that makes it very sporty, make power that is at least competitive, especially with this new line coming into 2025 of super middleweight sport bikes. This thing can really find a home. And I find it very curious that, well, Triumph hasn't really started to go down this path already. I can tell you that for me, that would be a major attractive bike just because I'm a sport bike guy. And there's really nothing in the lineup with Triumph that gets my attention. Now, I understand some of you guys are going to say, well, what about the Speed Triple? Guys, the Speed Triple is an amazing bike, but it is just a sport naked. Now, yes, the Double R does have clip-ons, but it doesn't quite have the power production to keep up with true leader class bikes, although it is all but there. But there's a price point that has to get, well, we got to get past a little bit. And I think for a lot of leader class sport bike guys, the Speed Triple would be a lot more attractive if it just had a normal standard style suspension, not necessarily Öhlins electronically adjustable. That just adds a lot of cost to a motorcycle that really doesn't need it. Throw a standard style suspension on the thing, drop the price by $2,000, $3,000, or maybe even $4,000, and you might start having a more competitive argument against the likes of other Japanese and European offerings. So what are my thoughts in general of Triumph? Just to sum it up, love the brand. I own 3 of them. And I would probably own more, provided that they would take certain steps to kind of get with the times a little bit when it comes to their sport bike offerings. But if you're looking for something that is a true throwback and a motorcycling culture that cannot be beat in terms of being friendly, helpful, and supportive, I don't think you could do better than Triumph in that. And let the rest of the market evolve around what Triumph does best, which is bring to you a motorcycle that you will fall in love with. And I think that's really what Triumph does best, is evoke emotion. And with that, guys, post up your comments. I would love to hear your thoughts on the brand of Triumph. Is there a certain motorcycle you like more than another? And we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for stopping by.